Okay. Right. So, who'd like to get us started? This. Would you like to? Okay. There you go.
Okay. So this is a rapid exercise in what I call conversation mapping, where we were sharing some of our understandings and assumptions and trying to work as creatively as we could, fired up by tea and chocolate biscuits in 20 minutes or so. So we started off by saying our task was to think about moving from a perfect storm to a perfect vision. What might a low-carbon future look like in 2030? And one of us, Tim, shared the fact that he's working on a research project at the moment where he's working with different models of governance, 3 particularly, one which is market-led, one which is central government-led and civil society-led, and then what kind of transition pathways is likely to lead to. And we also started from a couple of quite provocative, exciting assumptions. We accepted there's going to be pain on the way to the transition. In other words, adjustment and adaptation will come at a cost. And we also accepted that we may be moving into a phase of crisis and conflict internationally, if not here in the UK so much. And then we just brainstormed on what we thought it might need to look like. And I'll run through the points which are here in circles. And we ended up by just thinking about some of the methods for taking this forward. So what we foresaw was that there are going to be need to be new style civic leaders, and some of those may emerge from the whole process of dealing with crisis and conflict globally. We foresaw that there was likely to need to be a greater focus on knowing our neighbours and learning about our neighbourhoods and learning how to make things work there. We didn't say that was going to be easy. On a more optimistic note, we reckoned that there was a very good chance, of ending up with greater well-being and ending up being more resourceful in terms of how we adjust to cope with and adapt to climate change. We spent quite a bit of time unpacking how financial systems might need to be reformed and how economic systems might need to be reformed, and unpacking some of the economic assumptions that we currently live by that might need to change. And we noted in passing a redefinition of what money is and what it's for, redefinitions of growth, and building in codependency with climate and social justice into the way our economic systems function. And we also, again, trying to be optimistic, thought about the need for greater acceptance of the need for transition becoming embedded in our mentalities and possibly even enjoying the journey at times. We could have gone on a lot more than that. There could have been another 4 or 5 sheets if we've had more time, I think, and begun to draw some of the arrows that connect up the different bits of this scenario working. But then we switched to thinking about methods. We said we would start off with a more kind of more prolonged period of systems mapping and sharing understanding and building up a joint understanding of that way. More on identifying some of the key principles underpinning it all and the drivers for change, highlighting some of the dependencies, beginning to work creatively and mapping out some of the transition pathways, and particularly within that, identifying some of the leverage points where we might likely to get the best possible beneficial effects, which points in the whole system have we got the most influence over, and that might include some of the tipping points. That we would need to be facilitating social learning and adaptation along the way, and that we want to work forwards from these different governance models, which we'd noted at the beginning, but didn't really embed in everything else we were doing. So that was us in 15, 20 minutes.
That's great. I think what we also need is who was in that group. Yes. So I think what I'm going to ask you, Jane, is if you could send me a couple of paragraphs to summarize this, a list of the people involved, and what your next step is going to be. And then we can share it with everyone because others may be interested in joining you.
Fine.
Okay? So that will be great. So if you could email me that will be fantastic.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Take the surnames.
Yes, make sure you've got everybody's names. Thanks. Okay, next.
We were nominally talking about renewables, except we immediately changed the title to electricity behaviours. The reason being, we started out with the techniques, and this is very mathematically and engineering oriented, okay? But not solely that. We started off with, say, the 2 main techniques: complex network analysis, so power law distributions, etc., and agent-based modelling, because those are 2 techniques which we know we can throw at a whole pile of different problems. And there's loads of various techniques which are well understood. We then moved to say, well, what are the sorts of problems which are best tackled by these techniques? And then we realised that there are some certain issues which straddle both domains. Under network analysis, things like the behaviour of embedded generation, so small-scale generators, within the distribution network. We're not talking about the transmission high voltage network. This is sort of street level distribution, if you like. Because at the moment there's very, very little censoring or instrumentation out there, so the distribution network operators haven't got that much of an idea of what's going on there. They've never needed to know. They wait for someone to ring up and say, hey, the lights have gone out. But as we've got a much greater penetration of photovoltaic arrays, not micro wind turbines, but other source devices, there will be a need to understand and characterize that network. So embedded generation, that gives us an active network, and active networks in general. And under agent-based modeling, things like dynamic tariffs. What we mean by a dynamic tariff is that in a sense, we've got one. It's called Economy 7, but it's not particularly dynamic. You have the choice of switching your washing machine on after midnight. Well, it's dynamic after a while. You get it cheaper then. That's just a way of encouraging people to use electricity at different times when there's an easy excess of supply. But you can see that if there is lots of renewable wind power generation on the network, there's a need to mop it up at various times, which is dependent upon probably climate change, depending on because when the wind's going to blow. So electricity companies will be able to say, well, hey, the wind's blowing a lot. We've got to offload all this extra power somewhere, so we can encourage you in the next 30 minutes, next 2 hours, to plug in your electric vehicle or your hybrid vehicle, recharge your car battery, because we have to more or less give away the power because it's going to be dirt cheap. It's a way of having a responsive load, if you like. But these dynamic tariffs are not just an engineering problem, because a person makes the decision on whether they do actually want to plug their electric vehicle in or whatever in at that particular time. Because if you're going out, then you can't leave your vehicle plugged in. You need to go and use it. Or you know that you've got to go out in 2 hours' time. The tariff is quite high, but hey, I've got to go out in 2 hours' time. I have to charge my car. I've got to plug it in. Tough. I've got to pay the price. So it's not just an engineering problem. People have to make a decision. And as soon as people start making decisions, we have something that's very suitable for an ABM, and we have what is undoubtedly a complex system. So it's an interesting interaction between a social system and an engineering system. Responsive loads, that's quite a technical thing for those who know about it, but it's all part of the same thing. Again, storage you can think of in terms of such as the battery in your electric vehicle, say. There are other forms, but they all have to be dealt with, and people have to make decisions about whether they store or use electricity at any particular time. Connected to dynamic tariffs are things like market behavior, and that's another classic happy hunting ground for an agent-based model. Bringing all this together, and it's another thing which is critical to all complex systems, and that is the concept of scale. And in terms of electricity networks, we may be talking about what we call microgrids, which are sort of very small, maybe 1,000 homes, maybe less, up to, as we heard from David this morning, the international supergrid. They're all doing the same thing. It's all shoveling electrons around. So in principle, it's doing exactly the same thing, but it's doing it at vastly different scales. And therefore, there will be different behaviors based on the topology of those networks. Which is why you've got this interaction between network analysis and ABMs, why we see that as a scale and a techniques problem. Another way of thinking about the microgrid and the supergrid is the difference between something which is decentralized and something which is necessarily centralized. But the interesting point is, how are those two going to interact? And they are going to have to interact. And they're going to meet at some point. Okay? So possibly this idea of, and I think this is something you were talking about in the other group, this idea of between something being centralised and decentralised, large scale, small scale. That is common to lots of complex systems. We also threw into the hat that we weren't 100% certain what to do about it. It's clear, I've talked about electric vehicles, that is going to happen at some point. Whether from an energy security point of view we actually want the entire transport system to be electric is a separate question. But clearly transport is going to have to interact with the electricity grid. Heat, say, well, hey, that doesn't have anything to do with the electricity. Well, it does if you've got a CHP unit, combined heat and power unit, or what it may be doing, if you're able to store heat effectively, you are displacing the need to use electricity at some particular point. So it's still, even though it is not physically interacting with the system, it has a link via person making decision to how the electricity network actually, what its load is. Okay, so it has an indirect effect. We think this is also. There's social and human elements as well as the good solid engineering elements in there, and we think that's perfectly happy hunting ground for lots of complex system analysis.
Great, thank you very much. Again, if you could send me a paragraph or two about what you've just described, do you have a list of the people who were in your group?
Yeah, I'll make something up.
Okay, because there's also a big list over there of people who were interested. I know some of them were not here, so it would be great to combine the two. Okay. Yep.
Hi. I happened to be standing too close to the post-it when Eve handed out the pens earlier. First thing I want to say is there's a strange thing in this building that 20 minutes in those two rooms is a lot longer than 20 minutes in the room we were in. So I apologise that we haven't solved the same issues. Interestingly, we started from a similar point. We started with looking at an energy policy system and how smart metering changes the behaviour of the individual and how the information from that could be used to influence how people use the electricity within their home. And then we realised that there's probably a wider stakeholder group to that. We looked at a separate problem where actually a lot of the systems we use, intelligent homes coming along, our cars, our transport network, most of the office buildings we work in, actually have embedded software systems, and you could design your software to be the intelligent agent sorting out your energy needs. And we realised that these two actually link together in terms of behaviour. It could be behaviour of the software. We then, I hope it was a consensus, it might just be me rambling on as usual, we then went to look at the actual, not the problem itself, but the problem of dealing with the problem. We felt there's a wider stakeholder community out there, probably beyond just energy and environment. I've even forgotten what the other part of this one was, and the carbon footprint and things like this, in all of these problems. And listening to David Putnam earlier on the video about the scientists having to have a single voice, I don't think that's going to happen. So we have to find a way to engage with them that shows these multiple stakeholder viewpoints in a realistic, sensible way, which is going to answer their problems. So we felt we needed to get scientists together and to sort of break away from the usual kind of agenda of these kinds of meetings, which is 7.5 hours of what I did with my research grant last year by 17 different top academics, followed by 2 minutes of networking over wine and nibbles at the end. So we felt we wanted to find a way of looking at these different viewpoints, maybe some sort of soft system modelling or some other intervention or methodology, at this kind of level to start with. So as a next step, bring together people that were here today and from some of the other seminars that have happened or are going to happen, maybe choose 2 or 3 different methodologies and good facilitators, get them in a room with the scientists and start from the first minute of the day, 9 o'clock, let's look at this problem, just so we can see whether these methodologies can actually help point towards solving some of these problems and moving forwards on whatever it was we started, co-evolutionary dynamics. So maybe even that can It might even be a good process for starting off the research program, if nothing else, but it might be a way of trying to develop methodologies and be comfortable with working in that kind of way. And I think that sums it up.
The whole, and then the next level, which is the high level. So we want to test this methodology.
We want to test it. We're doing this to test the methodology at this level and then introduce it to scientists at a higher level to try and get that common voice to the policymakers at some level, or get the policymakers involved. But we think it was important for us to test the methodology. Is that about it?
Okay, thank you. And I'll ask you to do the same, please. Well, you already got a list of the participants, haven't you? Yeah. And then just send me. Okay. And I think Eileen?
Okay. Community engagement and energy use. Basically what we did was we shared what we're doing, what we're interested in, and what I've done here is just collected on some bullet points what we're interested in. We felt that we all had a great connection and are very interested, and we'll certainly be in email contact to develop these ideas. So this is not a research project. It's some ideas about what our common interests are. And I have to say, as a community activist myself, this is actually where you start with human beings. What are they interested in? That's got their motivation. What's their passion? They'll then actually do something. If you have something that you impose on them, which is actually what we do with community engagement, it just doesn't stick. So you start from where people are, and this is where we are. A wide and all sectors neighbourhood community engagement on sustainable energy use. That's really you might say, the umbrella thing. To look at the forms and processes for effective collective engagement, and what are they? Attitudes and the gap between attitudes and behaviour, which needs an experimental psychology approach, not the kind of thing that's being done in the environmental world, which doesn't actually get at this gap between people's what they say and what they do. And Anna Plodowski, who was here before, that's her speciality, and she's got some innovative ways of thinking about how you actually get at that. So that's a really innovative part of what we might do. The role of information and technology and communication, new technology and communications, is crucial to the whole business of community engagement in neighbourhoods. An action research approach, thinking about transition pathways, where are we now as individuals and collective, and how do we get there, and the different things. That, of course, also links into transition towns, but there are many other things as well. A comparative international and national, in other words, scaling out at the same level, as well as, and this is the scaling up, from the local to the city to the national to the regional to the global. And I have to say, somebody in our little group has got a passionate interest in some of this, okay? And the relationship between community processes and authority structures. There are two of us that are actually already working on that, particularly around planning. So I'm over-enthusiastic, I'm over-stimulated, because I haven't got time to do any of this in addition to what I'm doing. But really, that's, to me, what's about effective community engagement, is start where people are, and then we might actually get somewhere. But it needs what I would say is a cultivation, a horticulture approach, rather than mechanical. This is our design. Let's try to get people to buy into it, which is what the authorities and everybody tries to do. You actually have to start with where people are on an individual level, which is and that's the best place to do that, is in neighbourhoods. Though, of course, there are other communities of interest which aren't located in neighbourhoods, of which a lot of this would apply as well. But I think starting in neighbourhoods is a very good thing.
Great, thank you. Again, have you got a list of the people involved?
We need their email.
Yeah, I think everybody will have the same issue. So when you send me the list of people within your group, as long as I'm assuming that everyone gives us the permission to share their email and send it to the leader of the group. And then what we'll do is we'll send all these notes to everyone, because I'm sure that there are people who will be interested in more than one idea. And then the main thing to do is really take a practical step in quite the near future, not to just leave it. I think it's essential that we keep the momentum going. By the way, is any other group that has not spoken? Is anyone else in the room that has not spoken? Excellent. Well, in that, I'm absolutely amazed. We're within 5 minutes of time. I can hardly believe. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I do need to do some thank yous. First of all, thank you, Jeff. Jeff invited all the speakers, organized the video recording yesterday, and invited the panel members. So it's really, Jeff, first of all, would have to thank. I would then like to thank Wojtek and Raoul, because they did all the admin, and without them we wouldn't have had any tea, coffee or lunch. Thank you, And Jack, because Jack is going to provide us with a wonderful record of everything that's happened today. And I think that's essential, because we will really want to disseminate it beyond this group. I know there are an awful lot of people who would have also liked to be here today, and for whatever reason they couldn't, would have had to get the theatre rather than move in here. So thank you, Jack. But the most important element, of course, is all of you. And thank you very much for coming, for your contribution. And I really feel quite enthused, because I think we should get forward now and get 2-3 ideas moving. And that will be great. So if you need any support, if you need any rooms or whatever, just let me and Jeff know, and we'll give you all the help we can. And then also start thinking about publications, please, and just send us some ideas. And then when we see what we've got, we can decide whether it's an edited volume or whether a special issue of one of the journals. So we have wine and nibbles next door. So let us finish.
But before we finish, yes. I'm sure on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank you, Eve, as well, for setting it up.
Thanks to Jeff also. Jeff should be congratulated.
Okay, thank you. So, finish the day with some wine, and thank you all for coming, and see you soon.